What up, Wizards? It's Dev, Mtg. We like it at Magic, and as Steve Harvey would say, we got a good one for you today. Because, you know, lately I have been feeling the pull of Commander more and more. I've been looking at stuff on EDA Track, checking out some articles here and there, talking to some buds about some cards, and that is usually where the trouble comes in, because everyone in the world has been playing Commander for about a decade now, and I just got here. I'm just sticking my head in the room like, is this the room I'm supposed to be in? So yeah, I think I found my place, but at the same time, you guys know a lot more than I do about a whole lot of stuff in Commander. So I'll just be talking to a group of people like, hey, you guys heard about Kess? That looks like a fun card to build around. And they're like, yeah, Dev, yeah, we noticed and discussed it at length years ago. It's been reprinted down to $1 at this point. We know about Kess. And I'm like, oh, cool, yeah. You guys know about Kyrell? And they're like, Dev. But I can't help it. I'm basically a baby when it comes to EDH. I feel like a 5-year-old talking to adults like, did you know peanut butter is good? And they're like, yes, we know peanut butter is good. And I'm like, I like swimming. And they're like, yeah, swimming is nice. Jeez. So this is just kind of how things are. So I've taken it upon myself to try and learn a few things before actually doing this video. But like that 5-year-old, I've just learned a bunch of new information, and I am very excited to share it with you. So I'm sorry to make you suffer through it, but unlike that 5-year-old, I'm going to try to make sure that that information is not all just parroted, regurgitated words that you've heard before. Because like I said, I have been looking into some budget commanders, you know. I'm dipping my toe into EDH, but that means my wallet is still up here at waist height, completely dry. I don't want to spend a ton of money getting into the format, so I've really spent a lot of my time looking at the best budget commanders, and I've probably read anywhere between 10 or a dozen or more lists and watched videos at this point, and I noticed that the same ones kind of keep coming up at this point. Over again, the double-digit number of articles that I've read about budget commanders at this point, I keep seeing the same like 20 or 25 ones kind of keep popping up. So what I'm going to do today is try to make sure that I don't just list the same 5 commanders that you've heard every other YouTuber and article writer on the internet list. And with that, our thesis is stated. Let's take a look at the top 5 commanders under $1 that haven't been done to death. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. And we're back. Remember to lick a sub sandwich. Now, number 5, I know, is one that not too many people have talked about because they haven't really had the time to talk about it. I think the card's only been out for a couple of weeks. So for number 5, let's start with Gandalf, Friend of the Shire. You know, honestly, I feel pretty bad for this little dude over here. Like, he's a Gandalf, you know, put some respect on his name. But since the set came out, everyone's been talking about the mono white Gandalf. Some people about the Is It Gandalf, although fewer than the mono white one, right? But literally no one on the planet is talking about Blandolf over here. Although I like to call him Yes We Can Dolph. These are literally the worst jokes on YouTube. Why do you stay? This thing is 4 mana, which sounds like a lot, but it's alleviated a good bit by the fact that he has flash and you can play him at like the end of your opponent's turn or something. There's also a line of text on here towards the end that you get some value and the ring tempts you, draw some cards, seems fun. But the real thing I want to zero in on here, and the thing that makes me want to brew with him the most, is that middle line of text, giving all of your sorcery spells flash effectively, making all of your sorceries instants. Whew, fireworks indeed. That's a good line of text, and I want to brew around that. And there are obviously some powerful sorceries that become completely broken as instants. You know, you can steal stuff with bribery. If you don't want to spend that much money, you can just play like Invoke the Winds or Blue Sun's Twilight from one of these newer sets and steal stuff at instant speed. It's just crack to be able to steal stuff during a combat stuff. But there's also Days Undoing if you just want to play Time Twister at instant speed. And note, that last line of text on Days Undoing, it's not your turn, so the turn doesn't end. That's pretty slick, Jack. And then Windfall, you can just kind of play Wheel of Fortune at instant speed. If you've never done any of these things, they seem really powerful. Not to mention, there's a pretty good variety of quote-unquote normal sorceries that you can play in your deck. Stuff like Treasure Cruise and Merchant Scroll, and Treasure Cruise becoming Ancestral Recall sounds pretty okay. I'm pretty sure that's fine. And then Merchant Scroll, it always kind of sucked that this wasn't an instant because you can't cast it at instant speed to search for a counterspell. Now you can. That busts the card in half. You can also do cool budget stuff like turning that Devastation Tide in your binder into a Cyclonic Rift that costs, you know, a fraction of the price of a Cyclonic Rift, but you can also get some pretty cool mileage out of some cards you never thought you'd play, like Energy Tap, a card I've been staring at for almost 25 years at this point and have never really known what to do with it. It turns out this deck is what you do with Energy Tap. Now, the deck can't be all sorceries. I mean, I guess it could if you wanted to accept that challenge, but it doesn't have to be, and most people don't build it that way. You'll see things like Wizards of Thay in there, and the occasional Echo Mage as other creatures besides just Gandalf. Wizards of Thay, just some redundancy. It's nice to be consistent and have something else that allows you to play sorceries as instants. But Echo Mage is a cool little creature to play, man. Being able to copy all of those busted sorceries that you're playing is a pretty sweet thing to be able to do. But there's other ways to get like board presence and actually close games in here besides just casting dumb sorceries. And they play things like Murmuring Mystic from time to time, and then Dika, Fractal Theorist, a card that you don't see every day, but is pretty awesome when it comes to actually finishing games with this thing. I hate to repeat myself, but like I said back there a second ago, this card hasn't been out for very long, so obviously people haven't had a whole lot of time to get to talking about it yet. That said, despite all that, I am really surprised at how underrepresented this card is on EDHREC right now. Only 68 people have even made a deck around it in like the month that you've been able to do that. And it's like number 1,883. It's way down there. Ain't nobody building decks with this thing. But the few people who are doing some cool things, and I wanted to point this thing out. This thing, like it's a Hurloon Minotaur or something. It's a Gandalf. Put some respect on its name. Put some respect on Hurloon Minotaur's name while you're at it, Dub. But anyway, let's move on to number 4, everybody. This time, we're going to take a look at Jalira, the Master Polymorphist. I was more or less completely unaware of this card's existence. I know that polymorph effects have existed since forever in Blue at this point. It's a thing Blue does, and it's always been kind of silly, but it gets a lot more serious when you can just cast polymorph every single turn, and then maybe untap this and cast polymorph again that same turn, and then find another way to untap it, cast polymorph again. It just seems kind of dumb to be able to effectively tutor any creature just onto the table in a singleton format. It turns out kind of is. Now, the song is the same in pretty much all the builds of this deck. You're going to play non-creature spells. What give you creatures, you clever thing, aren't you? You're going to play things like Lesotep Plating that give you a creature and also do other stuff. Callous Dismissal, which is kind of a boomerang effect along with a dude. Launch Mishap, which is kind of a counter spell along with a dude. And there's a bunch of different versions of all of these kinds of cards that people are playing in these decks. But of course, there's a whole bunch of objectively goofier and also objectively more overpowered in the mid and late game options that you could be using to make your creatures for you in Blue. You got things like Thopter Spy Network, which has always been one of my favorite options. I love Thopter Spy Network, but if you want to say a funny word a few times a game, you could always play Scuttle Tide, and then maybe the most powerful of these, when all is said and done, is Metallurgic Summonings, which can actually win a game for you from time to time. But you ain't here to see Destiny's Child, you're here to see Beyonce, so enough with the supporting cast. Let's get to the big ladies, what you can throw on the table with a polymorph from time to time. You can do stuff like Astral Dragon, which is a pretty sick card that I was more or less, again, completely unaware existed. I'll let you look at that for a second. Or you can do a fun little combo lock with Stormtide Leviathan, an archetype of imagination. You see, no one plays Island Wall creatures because no one does that. Are you going to argue in the comments? You actually, Dev, nobody plays Island Wall. I'm pretty sure I can confidently say that nobody plays Island Wall creatures. But aside from that, when nothing can have or gain flying, it looks like you basically got yourself a better than a moat on the table for your polymorph, and that is what I want to be doing in a game of Magic. And the best thing about these dudes is that everything on screen right now is pretty budget. But if you wanted to spend a couple of extra bucks, you could always go with Hullbreaker Horror. Yeah, it's actually really good in this deck, standard players, believe it or not. And if you wanted to get real silly, you could always go Darksteel Colossus, which you can get a copy of for only about $5 right now, and it's a pretty good add to the deck. So even the expensive guys don't actually cost that much to order one single copy of, And when it comes to the totality of the deck list, this is probably the cheapest commander to build around that we'll look at all day, First of all, the commander herself is only like 20 or 25 cents to own a copy of right now, which is a great deal for this stupid fun thing. But all those stupid little cards in the deck that are like, oh, make a blue guy, make a token guy, and then do something else, counter a spell, who cares, right? Like, all that stuff is like 10 cents right now. And most of the creatures that you're building around too are like a couple of bucks at maximum. So what's stopping you from building this deck right now? It's probably like $25 to own an entire deck list for Jalira, and it looks awesome. Or at least it deserves more respect than it's currently getting. Like right now, there's only 855 decks on EDHREC for this thing, and that sounds like a lot until you realize that it makes it number 753 on the site, which is a pretty low ranking. I feel like anything that's under $1 and like below the top 500, probably something we need to reevaluate. And I know I don't play Commander. I don't know anything about this format. All I know is that this thing looks wild to me and I want to try it. But I don't know if you guys know how hot it is in this little room here. You can probably tell a little bit because I get redder and redder as most videos go on. So what I need is a little bit of a break. I'm going to brew myself up a nice cup of Java, throw a couple ice cubes in that thing, and have myself a little coffee break. This week on the coffee break, we'll be talking about Tanos, the toy maker, who is number 3 on Dev's list. Tanos is capable of copying some of the biggest and best creatures in the history of the game, and yet no one seems to have taken notice, as this card is currently available for only 25 cents and is well out of the EDHREC top 500 at number 602. I feel as though this deck needs special attention now, as it has just gotten a brand new friend in Radagast, a card that gives birds and beasts ward and was meant for the Tanos deck. But there are, of course, cards that the deck has been playing to great effect for some time now. Cards like Curiosity Crafter, which with the number of tokens on the table, allows us to draw a great number of extra cards, and Keeper of the 9 Gales, which functions like a trade-win rider if you have enough birds out. However, the deck often tends to lean more into the beast side of the equation, with cards like Wirewood Savage to draw cards, and Krosan Warchief to make those beasts cheaper. The deck also features Baloths of both the Ravenous and Rampaging varieties. Ravenous to gain enough life to keep us in the game and enact our plan, and Rampaging Baloths because if we get a copy of it with Tanos, we can quickly and easily fill our board with tokens. But the deck cannot be all meat. There needs to be sauce. So to secure wins, we've got things like Perplexing Test to return all non-token creatures to owner's hands, and if that doesn't win the game outright, then at least we can Tanos and start casting those creatures again to get more copies of them. We can also overload a March of Progress to take home wins, and of course, we've got Twinning Staff to effectively create a copy of Tanos and get even more copies of even more copies. Altogether, playing the Tanos deck can be a very powerful experience. It is a deck that is not for the birds. It is not often that Coffee Break Dev makes a joke, but when I do, I make it count. Now back to Dev with number 2 on our list. Thanks, Joe. Coffee Break Dev's name is going to be Joe from now on. It just makes sense to me. But let's get to that number 2 he was talking about there. And this one is interesting because it is the most expensive card we'll talk about today. And yet, next to Gandalf, it is the least played card we'll talk about today. That kind of chasm doesn't make any sort of sense to me, especially when Bladewing the Risen looks so cool. Why isn't anybody playing with this thing, man? Only about 511 players have built decks with this thing on EDHREC, and that really confuses me because this card looks and is awesome. I mean, it's barely cracked the top 1,000. It's like number 977 on the site at this point, so it is honestly in danger in the next couple of sets, depending on what commanders come out and stuff, of being well below the top 1,000. I just don't get it, man. It's a dragon. That's a point in its favor just in and of itself, and it reanimates stuff, so I'm just gonna like it, and I assume that there's a lot of other Magic players that like that stuff too. So are there just better legendary dragons to build around? You might say yes, but not for what we're doing. Not really. See, what a lot of people are doing and just rut-row Terror of the Peaks. I win the game, I guess, because there's a lot of funky stuff you can do with that once you get it set up. But if you don't want to spend like $30 or whatever it is on Terror of the Peaks, you could always go with Scourge of Valkus, Molten Echoes, and apparently these 3 cards are some sort of infinite combo or something. That's what I hear around the internet. You could also go with stuff like Terror of the Peak, Scourge of Valkus, and Cursed Mirror, which is also one of them combos they talk about from time to time. You see, Cursed Mirror is going to enter the battlefield as a copy of Bladewing, and then you put the Bladewing that was already a Bladewing, the actual Bladewing, into the graveyard because of the legend rule, and then Cursed Mirror's into the battlefield ability is going to just return Bladewing from your graveyard to the battlefield, but he came into play, so his ETB trigger goes off, you get to return a dragon from your graveyard to play, so you just return the Bladewing again, and then he dies to the legend rule, and you return him again, and then he dies to the legend rule, and you return him again, and this keeps happening. The cool thing is that, again, you have Terror of the Peaks, or you have, Scourge of Valkus out, or maybe you have an Impact Tremors or something like that to effectively make these infinite ETB triggers equal infinite damage. This is also why Molten Echoes works, by the way. It does basically the same thing that Cursed Mirror is doing, that you're going to create a copy of Bladewing, send the actual Bladewing to the graveyard, use the copy Bladewing trigger to bring the actual Bladewing back, and you just keep doing this over and over. And again, you're getting ETB triggers or dies triggers or whatever you're trying to do. So if you have like a Bastion of Remembrance set up, or a Blood Artist or something like that, you're also getting these triggers. So there's like a million ways to set this infinite combo up. But there's also dragons. You can play an infinite combo in the deck, but also you can play big fat dragon men. I mean, on a budget, you can play stuff like Hellkite Courser, which just grabs the Bladewing out of your command zone for you and gets the combo started. Hoarding Broodlord is both new and pretty cheap, and a Demonic Tutor when you reanimate this can also help you get combo pieces in your hand. And then even stuff like Bladewing Deathless Tyrant. The card's super cheap and just fills your board if you've been able to stock your graveyard well. While I was writing this video, this one was number one for a really long time, but I had to sort of curb my own enthusiasm. I realized that I was being a 12-year-old. I was being that 5-year-old again. Like, did you guys know dragons are cool? Like, yes, Dev, we understand dragons are cool, but honestly, I really don't think that people are looking at this one quite enough. Basically, any deck that is an infinite combo on the one hand, and then the fallback plan, in case that doesn't happen, is smash their face with big honking dragons. That's everyone's kind of deck. That's not just my kind of deck. But oh, how we live in a world of contrast, do we do? Yes, we do. See, the thing is, number two, I don't know what that was either, sorry, but number two was the most expensive at a whole 75 cents. Highway robbery, right? It's a pretty good price. The most expensive card we'll look at today was number two, and it's also one of the least played. Now, number one, on the other hand, this is the least expensive card we'll look at all day, and yet it is the most played. And yet, still not played enough by my count. So what's it gonna be? Place your bets. 3-2, number one is Vega the Watcher. Now, first of all right, you have to admit this, Street Fighter character. It's more or less all I need. That's why it's my number one. Let's get out of here. What's couch card of the day? Now, the actual reason this is number one is because it turns out there's like, I don't know, 15 ways that you can cast a card that isn't in your hand. So the card's amazing. Now, I'm only going to give you like one example of each mechanic that lets you do this, but there are a wealth of things in each of these mechanics, typically that are very good cards, that will do all of this stuff. Like if you want to use the Foretell mechanic, that'll draw you cards, and that's usually what this deck is built around. You see stuff like Spectral Deluge in there, which is a pretty powerful card, right? You see stuff like Malevolent Hermit and other disturbed creatures, although Hermit is one of the better ones. You'll see things like Giant Killer, right? Occasionally a Brazen Borrower or two, but anything that is an adventure is basically going to be real good with a Vega. Get a body and a card. Let's go. You'll occasionally even see stuff like Radical Idea. Yeah, I bet you forgot Jumpstart was even a thing. Not the set, but the mechanic. They messed up and named the mechanic and a set the same thing. Only one has a hyphen and the other doesn't. There's some differences, but still. Radical Idea is a card, Jumpstart's a mechanic, and it works with this. There's also stuff like Ephemerate, which has Rebound if you want to protect that Vega. It seems like a nice card to be holding on to. There's Riftwing Cloudskate. Yeah. Creatures have Suspend. Cards have Suspend. So if you want to cast any of those, they work with Vega. Things like Faithful Mending. I have somehow made it all the way this far and have not brought up Flashback yet. I don't know how that happened, but Flashback totally works. Cards cast from your graveyard work with Vega. And if you actually want to close games out rather than just drawing your entire library, things like Shark Typhoon tend to work pretty well. You know, you got Talran, which is in like 3 of the decks that we've looked at already today. It tends to be in most decks with blue, but Talran's really good here. You're casting a lot of stuff every turn. And then you'll even see like Psychosis Crawler in here from time to time, because again, you're drawing a lot of cards. So sometimes you can just kill people with Psychosis Crawler. There also appears to be a very stupid combo in this deck. You know, I'm not really sure how the Afterlife works, but if there's a hell, I'm probably going to go there for showing you this thing if you didn't already have knowledge of it. There's this thing called Knowledge Pool. Take this thing in right here. You see, when pool enters play, everyone's going to exile the top 3 of their library, and then whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, it specifically says that, the player exiles that spell, and if the player does, which they have to, he or she may cast another non-land card exiled with pool without paying that card's mana cost. So what you're going to do is you're going to combo this with like Lavinia. You could also do a Dranith Magistrate, but I think Dranith Magistrate's like $20 right now, and it costs a lot. Lavinia is like $1, and I'm pretty sure it works more or less the same way, where they're kind of just locked out of playing cards from their hand for the rest of the game. So Vega has ways to draw its entire deck and also has a combo that locks everybody else out of playing Magic. So I don't know why more people aren't playing this. Some people are. It is the only deck we've talked about today that cracks the top 500, which is quite the achievement, but it's like number 487. It is dangerously close, like in the next set or two, to falling out of the top 500. And that would be a shame, because I actually think this might be one of the best budget commanders ever. But again, I don't know anything about this format, so, you know, I'm probably wrong, but just looking at everything this card does, I know you got to have mana to play spells. I know once you get Knowledge Pool combo down, you still have to cast stuff too, so there is that to worry about, but the deck just looks completely righteous, man. I like drawing my entire deck, and occasionally, I hate to admit it, I like lock combos too, so just a sweet little thing that really not enough people are on. But now there's only one thing left to do, brother, and that's the couch card of the day while I skillfully deliver self-promotion as only I can. Now, I noticed in between takes here that you can't see the cards on the couch, but here they are. You see those cards right there on the couch. You see them, but now when I let go of my camera, it'll spring back up, which is a weird thing to do. Stop doing that, camera. But anyway, I'm going to pick one off the couch here while I tell you to check me out on Twitch. We're actually going to celebrate the 3-month anniversary of the Twitch streams coming up later on this month, so make sure you're following. So be invited to that. We can celebrate, have some cake, whatever we end up doing. It'll be fun. Aside from that, check me out on Patreon down there. Link in the description. It's basically how I'm able to pay my bills and like live and stuff and like eat food. So I need to be able to do those things. So if you want to support the channel, go over to Patreon, and I do think it does make the videos better. You go back like 3-4 years ago, videos are objectively awful. So I think we're doing slightly better now, and that is in large part because of the Patreon and stuff. So appreciate you, and if you want to be a new member, that'd be awesome. It's just $1, but let's go ahead and pick up the couch card of the video. What's it going to be? What are we going to find down here? Well, I've actually picked up 2 cards. Let me shave the first one and pick up the Wittigo. Does anybody have any memory of this card actually existing? The Wittigo from Ice Age. This is 3 and 3 green. This is Summon Wittigo. It's a 0/0, but it comes into play with 6 +1/+1 counters on it. During your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on Wittigo if it blocked or has been blocked since your last upkeep. Otherwise, remove a counter from Wittigo. Ignore this effect if there are no counters left on Wittigo. Now, here's the thing. I have looked at Wittigo a million times. Even back in the day, I would have told you Wittigo is one of my favorite creatures. I had no idea that's what it did. I would not have been able to tell you that that's what Wittigo did. But either way, isn't he cool? You know, is he based on a cryptid? Is he based on the Wendigo? Or some sort of abominable snowman? Or like, what is he actually supposed to be? I think he's awesome. He always kind of reminded me of the Sasquatch from Final Fantasy VI. I think is one of the other reasons that I like him. Just a lot came together to get me to like the Wittigo, is all I'm saying. But anyway, good card today. Anytime we pull something from Ice Age, I'm pretty happy with that. But that is just about all that I got today. We danced and played all night, and I got to go edit this video now. So again, just let me know what your favorite budget commanders are down there, and whether or not you want part 2. I had fun. I'm going to do it regardless of whether or not you want it. I hope you do want it, and validate me with your comments. But aside from that, I guess I'm donezo for this onezo, man. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.